They must turn from their evil ways and stop their violence. Who can tell? Perhaps even God will change his mind and hold back his anger from destroying us. When God saw what they had done and how they had put a stop to their evil ways, he changed his mind and did not carry out the destruction he had threatened. The change of plans greatly upset Jonah. He became very angry. He complained to the Lord about it. Didn't I tell you this would happen before I left home? That you would do this? This is why I ran away. I knew that you were merciful and compassionate. You're slow to get angry. You're filled with unfailing love. You're eager to turn back from destroying people. Just kill me now. I would rather be dead than alive if what I predict does not come true. Then God replied, is it right to be angry about this? Jonah went out to the east side of the city, and he made a shelter to sit under as he waited to see what would happen to the city. And God arranged for a plant to grow, and as soon as it spread its broad leaves over Jonah's head, shading him from the sun, this eased his discomfort, and Jonah was very grateful for the plant. But the next day, God arranged for insects to come and eat through the plant so that it fell away. And as the sun grew hot, God arranged for a scorching east wind to blow on Jonah. The sun beat down on his head until he grew faint. He wished to die. Death is certainly better than living like this, he exclaimed. And God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry because this plant died? Then the Lord said, you feel sorry about the plant, though you do nothing to put it there. You came quickly and died quickly. But Nineveh had more than 120,000 people living in darkness, not to mention all the animals. Shouldn't I feel sorry for a city? I want to talk about how Jonah had his will and what he'd done with it, and how I feel sometimes we do this. The first verse says, God gave his message to Jonah of Amorite. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment because it's coming. I've seen how wicked they are. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa and he left Sal. See, the first thing I think we do sometimes is we get the will of God, and God tells us what we're supposed to do. And God tells us how our life's supposed to play out. And God gives us this pretty little picture, like a trailer of a movie. And he's like, here's what's going to happen. He gives you sneak peek previews of your life. And sometimes we see it and we're like, but God, that is nothing what I imagined. But God, that is not what I pictured. But God, I would be happier if you let me do it my way. And Jonah heard what God said, and he walked in the complete opposite direction. He was like, go this way, I'll go this way, and I'll be better, God. And he walked away from it. And I feel most of us, we do that. Most of us, we have this concept. The first part I want to go to, though, before I break this down, is Jonah 4, verse 2. I hear a lot of people, definitely our generation, making comments saying, God's bipolar. Y'all heard this? God's a bipolar God. God in the Old Testament was angry and full of wrath, ready to strike and kill because they disobeyed. And then in the New Testament, he became loving and merciful and graceful, and that he wouldn't hurt no one. Everyone heard this? Am I the only one who's heard people make this argument to say that Christ isn't real, that God doesn't exist? But Jonah, the prophet, the Old Testament, before the blood of Christ. This is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry, and filled with unfailing love. God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is not bipolar. God has always been love. Love is God, so God's always been love. And a lot of people want to look at all this stuff God done. See, God loved us too much to let the Israelites live like hell. God loved Abraham too much to break a promise to him because his descendants wouldn't be faithful enough to keep a bloodline for Jesus. That is why sometimes when we read the Old Testament, we see God doing things that doesn't make sense of the way he treats us now. Because he was looking ahead and said, I have to have the bloodline through Abraham that goes through David that comes to get Christ on earth. That is why sometimes people make that argument that's invalid. But I want to go back to Jonah. We see that Jonah was doing the complete opposite that God said. God said go left, Jonah went right. And as he was on his way to his right, and he started doing things that he wanted to do, he's on a ship, he's sleeping, he's on a boat, he takes a nap, and the next thing you know, it says that God sent a storm. And during the storm, everyone started casting lots. The people was first afraid of the storm, and then they was terrified because they knew who sent it. They knew God sent it for a purpose. And then that they feared God to worship him. See, even though Jonah was out of the God's will, even though Jonah went in the complete opposite direction, Even though sometimes we were out of God's will, and even though sometimes we go the complete opposite direction, and we go places God don't want us to be, we're doing things and we're hanging out with people God don't want us to be with. We're doing ministries that God said never be a part of. God still used Jonah to reach someone. See, that's the great thing about God. Sometimes this is the hard thing about God. Because even when sometimes we're not in the will of God, He'll still use you. And that's when it's hard to understand why you're not in the will of God, because you're getting used. But even as Jonah went the complete opposite direction, God used all things to show His glory, to show that He is in control. Because He used this moment to send a storm, to show the pagans on a boat, I am the God that you should worship, not anybody else. So sometimes, man, look at your life, and you might, I've made this argument to God, but God, I'm getting results in ministry. I'm getting the things done that you told me to. Look what I'm doing. And God's like, but you're not in my will. I'm still blessing you, but you're not in my will. Because Timothy, Paul told Timothy, even when we are unfaithful, he will remain faithful, because he will not deny himself. So check yourself. Just because you're doing work for God and you're getting good works does not mean that you're in the will of God. So examine what you're doing. The second part I want to look at, I lost it. Oh, there we go. Is chapter 3, verse 6. It says that the king of Nineveh, once he heard about this fast, once he heard that Jonah said, God's going to destroy this place, it says that the king of Nineveh stepped off of his throne. He tore his clothes of royalness. He put on a sack that showed he was sorrowful. See, the first thing I think we need to do sometimes is step down from our throne. Sometimes we have to humble ourselves. I heard someone once say, and it was in a book, that you can have one or two things in church. You can have a stage where man shows his glory, or you can have an altar where God shows his presence. And which one would you rather have? Because you can't chase both. The king of Nineveh understood that. He stepped off of his throne and he humbled himself before God. Makes me think of 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and turn away from their evil sins, I will hear them and I will heal their land. Man, the king of Nineveh, someone who didn't know of God, stepped down from power and said, God, take control. I don't want to be the king if it leads us to hell. But God, I want you to be in control no matter what it means. And the greatest thing is, I think sometimes when we fast or we pray, we have this idea that it's like playing the lottery. Oh, we're going to get something special. We're going to get something great out of it. You ever done that? I know I'm not the only one guilty of this. I've done it before. People do it all the time. They pervert the message of Christ. They pervert prosperity and try to make it into a get-rich scheme. We hear this, but the great thing about Nineveh, I said they fasted, and they wasn't fasting, in my opinion, so God wouldn't destroy them. No, because they didn't want nothing from God. They was fasting because they felt bad for what they'd done to God. They was fasting because they wanted repentance. They didn't care if their city got destroyed. Because it says, maybe in our fast, God will change his mind and not show wrath. Not if we fast, maybe. No, but through the fast, maybe. There's a huge difference in where that word comes up. In your life, what are you doing? Are you trying to do things so you get something from God, or are you doing something because God gave to you already? And I think that's what the people did. They was chasing God, and they fasted. I think sometimes if we would really put a fast in perspective and say God's will first, whatever that had, no hidden agendas in what we want, no hidden agendas in what we need. But God, this is your will. Let it glorify you. And then all of a sudden, God didn't destroy Nineveh, because he looked down, he saw that they humbled themselves and turned from their sins, and he healed their land. The next part I want to talk about happens over verse 5, 10, and 16 in chapter 1. The first thing that we see when he gets on the boat, and it says that God sent a storm. It says that the pagans was terrified. They was afraid of the storm. And then when they found out that Jonah was a Hebrew, they was terrified. And then it said that they worshiped God. I think the ESV uses the term that they feared God. They went from being afraid of harm, terrified because they knew the wrath of God, to being in awe-struck worship of who God was. Through Jonah's, even though Jonah was disobedient, it still was a moment to glorify God. The next thing I want to talk about is, even though the king humbled himself and showed emotion, the sailors on the boat worship God. Jonah has no emotion through this whole story. until chapter